Keanu had always found solace in these quiet moments, away from the noise and spotlight that came with his public life. He loved the simplicity of the city's daily rhythm, the way it could feel both hectic and serene at the same time. On this particular morning, he was walking down a street near his favorite cafe, just enjoying the fresh air when something caught his attention. A loud, unsettling noise broke through the peaceful atmosphere, a sharp hissing sound, followed by the sudden eruption of thick black smoke billowing from a nearby parked car. Keanu stopped in his tracks, instinctively looking toward the source of the disturbance. People began to gather around, staring at the car with wide eyes, some unsure of what was happening, others already murmuring in alarm. As the smoke grew thicker, Keanu's eyes locked onto the car in question. His heart skipped a beat when he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. A small, helpless figure was visible through the window. A baby, strapped into a car seat, was trapped inside the rapidly filling smoke-filled vehicle. Keanu's mind raced. There was no time to waste. He knew he couldn't just stand by and watch. The tension in the air grew heavier as the smoke began to pour out of the car, thick and suffocating. Keanu's heart pounded in his chest as the sound of crackling intensified, and the fire's heat became apparent even from a distance. The baby's cries were barely audible over the chaos, but they were still there, frantic, desperate. The car's engine sputtered, and a sudden burst of flames erupted from under the hood, making the situation even more urgent. Onlookers began shouting, some pulling out their phones, others frozen in fear, unsure of what to do. Keanu could hear voices rising in panic, but there was no time to wait. The flames were growing, and the baby was still inside, trapped in the car seat. Keanu didn't hesitate. The rest of the world seemed to blur as he sprang into action, his focus entirely on the baby and the need to get it out of the car before it was too late. He dashed toward the vehicle, pushing through the crowd that was beginning to gather around, all eyes wide in shock. His mind raced, calculating the quickest way to act, but his body already knew what to do. Every second mattered. Without waiting for the authorities to arrive, Keanu reached the car, taking in the scene for just a moment. The windows were darkened by smoke, the flames flickering dangerously. He could feel the heat radiating from the car, but he knew he couldn't waste time. He was the only one close enough to do anything. Keanu reached for the car door, pulling on the handle, but it was locked. Panic flickered for a moment, but he quickly scanned the surroundings and noticed a nearby rock. Without wasting another moment, he grabbed it and smashed it against the window, the glass shattering into pieces with a loud crack. The baby's cries were louder now, and Keanu's heart beat faster as he reached inside, his hands trembling but steady with determination. As the glass shattered and the debris scattered across the pavement, Keanu quickly reached inside, his focus narrowing on the baby in the car seat. The child was still crying, but there was a sense of panic in its cries, and it seemed to be struggling, unable to move. Keanu could feel the heat growing more intense, the flames licking at the edges of the car's interior. He carefully assessed the situation, making sure to stay calm despite the rising danger. His hands were already coated with shards of glass from the broken window, but he didn't care. He focused only on the baby. It was a tiny, vulnerable figure, its soft cries barely heard over the roar of the fire. The baby's small face was flushed, covered with beads of sweat, and its hands were clenched around the straps of the car seat. Keanu gently moved the straps aside, his fingers working quickly to unbuckle the child. He could feel the warmth from the flames growing stronger, the heat almost unbearable. With every movement, the urgency of the situation pressed down on him. His every instinct screamed at him to act fast. As he unstrapped the baby, he noticed the car's interior had become even hotter. The air was thick with smoke, making it harder to breathe. The baby, still strapped in, was far too young to escape on its own, and Keanu knew time was running out. He carefully lifted the baby out of the seat, feeling the warmth of the car's heat against his own skin. The little one's body was limp in his arms, still crying but now a little weaker, as though the smoke was taking its toll. Keanu cradled the baby against his chest, shielding it from the heat as much as he could. His mind raced with the knowledge that every second counted. He turned around, looking back at the crowd of onlookers, the fire now fully visible in the front of the car. The baby was safe for now, but they needed to move fast. As Keanu held the baby tightly in his arms, he turned to sprint away from the car, but just as he did, a sudden roar of flames erupted from beneath the hood, sending a burst of heat and smoke swirling into the air. The fire had spread quickly, and Keanu could feel the heat intensifying with each passing second. The flames were starting to engulf the car, now licking at the windows and door frames, threatening to consume everything in their path. The crowd gasped in shock as the fire blazed brighter, the car's tires now starting to pop and hiss. People in the crowd shouted in panic, and some took a few steps back, realizing just how close to disaster the situation was. Keanu's chest tightened, but his focus remained unwavering. The baby's fragile body was still in his arms, and he needed to get it to safety immediately. With the car now fully alight, the situation was no longer just urgent. It was perilous. Keanu quickly surveyed the area, knowing that running away wasn't enough. He had to get the child to safety, away from the spreading flames. His eyes locked onto a small group of bystanders who were standing off to the side, unsure of how to react. "Move back." Keanu called out to them, his voice steady but firm, urging them to clear the area. "Call the fire department. Get to safety now." Keanu knew the emergency services were on their way, but it would take a few more precious moments for them to arrive. He wasn't waiting. He quickly moved toward the edge of the sidewalk, his eyes focused on the path ahead. He could feel the heat from the burning car against his back, but he didn't look back. All that mattered was the life in his arms. The baby had stopped crying, its tiny body limp from exhaustion and the smoke. Keanu felt a surge of urgency in his chest. He had to get the child to safety. The small bundle of life he carried needed to be away from the flames, away from the danger, and into the arms of someone who could care for it. Without wasting another second, Keanu moved as quickly as he could, navigating through the stunned crowd and making his way toward the nearest building. His mind was laser-focused on one thing: getting the baby to safety. The heat from the fire grew stronger with every step he took, but he didn't falter. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the intense heat searing through his jacket, but all that mattered was getting the child out of harm's way. As he walked quickly down the sidewalk, Keanu noticed a small storefront just ahead with an open door. It wasn't much, but it was a safe place, out of the reach of the flames and smoke. Without hesitating, Keanu stepped inside, pushing the door open with his foot and quickly looking around to find a place to set the baby down. Inside, the small shop was quiet, with only a few customers who had been startled by the commotion outside. The store owner, a middle-aged woman, was standing behind the counter, eyes wide in confusion. When she saw Keanu rush in, cradling the baby, confusion turned into concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice shaky but filled with concern. Keanu didn't have time for explanations. "The car outside is on fire," he said urgently. "Please help me. I need a safe place for this child until the authorities arrive." The woman, still processing the situation, quickly nodded. Of course," she said, motioning toward a small corner of the shop with a couple of chairs. "You can leave the baby here. I'll call 911 right now." Keanu gently set the baby on one of the chairs, making sure it was safe and cushioned. The child, still breathing faintly, was too exhausted to cry, but Keanu could tell the little one had been through too much already. His heart ached for the baby, but he knew that getting it to safety was the most important thing. As the shop owner quickly dialed 911, Keanu stepped outside to get a better view of the situation. The fire was still raging outside, but the baby was now safe, away from the worst of the flames. He could hear the sirens in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Keanu looked back at the shop, feeling a quiet relief wash over him. He had done all he could, and now it was up to the professionals to take over. Just as Keanu stood outside the shop, still catching his breath from the rush of adrenaline, the sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of the emergency services. A fire truck roared around the corner, followed closely by an ambulance. The firefighters leapt out of the truck, already in full gear, as they rushed toward the scene. Keanu stepped back, allowing the professionals to take over. He watched as the firefighters swiftly move into action, some of them dashing toward the burning car, while others assessed the situation and began talking to bystanders. The crowd, still shaken, began to disperse as the firemen worked quickly, trying to contain the flames before the fire spread further. Keanu turned back toward the shop, where the baby was being carefully tended to by the shop owner, who had wrapped the little one in a blanket she had found. The baby was still conscious but seemed to be in a daze, likely overwhelmed by the smoke and the traumatic experience. The shopkeeper gently rocked the child, murmuring softly, trying to keep it calm. Keanu's attention returned to the car, where the flames were now under control, but the damage had been done. The car was nearly consumed by the fire, its exterior blackened and charred. It was a miracle that the baby had been inside and survived the ordeal, especially given the speed with which the flames had taken over. One of the firefighters, noticing Keanu standing nearby, walked over. "Thanks to you, we didn't lose anyone today," he said, his tone respectful. "You acted quickly. That baby wouldn't have made it out if you hadn't been there." Keanu shrugged, humility evident. "I just did what needed to be done," he replied. "The real heroes are the ones who get the job done every day. I'm just glad the baby's safe." The firefighter nodded, impressed by Keanu's modesty. "Well, you sure did your part," he said, tipping his helmet before turning back to the scene. Keanu looked back at the baby one last time, relieved to see that it was now in the care of trained professionals. The baby would be all right, and that was all that mattered. As the firefighters worked to douse the last of the flames, Keanu stood off to the side, his mind still racing from the events that had just unfolded. The relief that the baby was now safe was palpable, but something else was tugging at his heart, something he hadn't even thought about until now. The baby's mother. As if on cue, a woman rushed toward the scene, her face filled with concern and panic. Her eyes scanned the crowd, frantically looking for her child. Keanu recognized the look of a parent who had just endured the worst kind of fear. The woman was breathless, her eyes wide with desperation. "Where's my baby?" she cried out, her voice trembling. "Where is my baby?" Keanu's heart broke at the sound of her voice. He took a step forward and, without saying a word, gently pointed toward the shop where the baby had been taken for safety. "Your baby is inside. Safe now," he said, his voice calm but filled with empathy. The mother's eyes locked onto Keanu's, and for a split second, there was a moment of understanding between them. She rushed toward the shop without hesitation, her legs moving as fast as they could, desperate to be reunited with her child. Keanu watched her go, his heart filled with both relief and a quiet sadness. No parent should ever have to go through the terror of losing a child, even temporarily. Moments later, the mother entered the shop, her figure quickly disappearing inside. Keanu stood at the edge of the doorway, watching from the outside, unable to hear the reunion but imagining the emotional relief the mother must have been feeling. After a few moments, the woman emerged from the store, her arms wrapped tightly around her baby, who was now calm and resting in her arms. Tears streamed down the mother's face as she looked toward Keanu, her expression a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She stepped toward him, the baby nestled close to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving my child. I don't even have the words. I thought I was going to lose her." Keanu smiled softly, his eyes meeting hers. "It was my honor to help," he said quietly. "She's a fighter. I'm just glad she's safe." The mother wiped away her tears, holding her baby even closer, not wanting to let go. "I don't know what I would have done without you. You're my hero." Keanu shook his head gently. "I'm just a guy who was in the right place at the right time," he replied humbly. The woman smiled through her tears, still overwhelmed by the miracle of her baby's survival. "No," she said softly, her voice steady now. "You're a hero, and I'll never forget what you did for us." Keanu nodded, his heart warm with a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't done this for the recognition or praise, but it was clear that his actions had made a significant difference in the lives of this family. That, in itself, was all the recognition he needed. As Keanu stood there, watching the mother and baby reunited, the crowd of onlookers who had gathered around the scene began to react to the outcome. What had started as a terrifying moment was now shifting toward one of relief. The flames from the car had been extinguished, and the child was safe. The chaos had settled, leaving behind a profound silence, broken only by the hum of the fire trucks and the quiet sobs of the mother. The people who had been frozen in fear moments before now began to approach Keanu, their eyes filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. Many had witnessed the terrifying flames and heroic rescue, and now they couldn't stop talking about the brave man who had saved the baby. One of the onlookers, a middle-aged man with a camera, walked up to Keanu, holding out his phone. I didn't know it was you at first," he stammered, his voice trembling slightly. "But thank you. You saved that baby. People like you are the real heroes." Keanu nodded, giving the man a polite smile, though he wasn't seeking attention. "It's just about doing what's right in the moment," he said, his tone humble. "I'm just glad I could help." More people began to approach, all offering their thanks and admiration. "That was incredible," said another woman, her voice still shaky from the adrenaline. You didn't even hesitate. You just went in there. You saved that child's life. Keanu, though quietly appreciative of their words, continued to maintain his humility. It wasn't just me. We all play a part in moments like these, he replied. And I'm just grateful the baby's okay. The crowd gathered around him, some still in disbelief over what they had just witnessed. One man, shaking his head in amazement, said, I've never seen anything like that. You acted without thinking, just instinct. I thought for sure that car was going to explode, but you didn't hesitate. I don't think any of us would have been able to do that. Keanu gave him a soft but sincere smile. It's just the right thing to do when someone's in need, he said simply. The crowd's admiration only grew as the news quickly spread. Some pulled out their phones to capture the moment. Others were overheard telling stories of how Keanu had acted so bravely. They were witnessing not only the physical heroism, but the quiet power of someone who didn't seek attention, just a genuine desire to help in a moment of crisis. After a few moments, Keanu stepped back from the crowd, allowing the attention to shift away from him as the firefighters finished their work. He could hear the soft murmur of people discussing the rescue, their words filled with admiration and gratitude. But in the midst of it all, Keanu's attention was drawn back to the mother, who was standing a little ways off, holding her baby close to her chest, still clearly shaken from the ordeal. Keanu knew he had made a difference, but he also understood the deep emotional toll that such a frightening experience could have on a parent. The mother's tear-filled eyes met his from across the street, and without hesitation, she walked toward him, still clutching her baby in her arms. As she approached, her emotions overflowed. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I thought I was going to lose her, and you saved her. I don't know what I would have done. Keanu's gaze softened, and he met her with a calm, comforting presence. You don't need to thank me, he said gently, his voice steady and reassuring. I was just in the right place. The real strength is in you, in the way you held on to hope when everything seemed uncertain. The mother choked back a sob, her eyes filled with gratitude as she looked down at her baby, who was now calm, safe, and secure in her arms. I can't believe she's here with me after everything that happened, she said, her hands gently caressing the child's tiny face. Keanu smiled softly, his heart warmed by the sight of the reunited family. She's a fighter, he said, nodding toward the baby. And so are you. The mother managed a small, tearful smile as she hugged her child a little closer. I won't ever forget what you did today. You gave me back my world, she whispered, her voice filled with sincerity. Keanu simply nodded, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. There was no need for grand words or recognition. Just this moment, this family reunited, was all the thanks he needed. He could tell that his role in the baby's rescue had meant the world to the mother, but in reality, it was the love and strength of a parent that had carried the most weight in this whole ordeal. As the mother hugged her baby once more, Keanu quietly stepped back, content in knowing that he had played a part in saving a life and bringing this family back together. As the fire crews continued to work on putting out the last remnants of the fire, the crowd of onlookers, who had been observing the scene in stunned silence, began to stir. The tension that had been in the air earlier started to dissipate, replaced by a mix of awe, relief, and admiration. The sight of Keanu saving the baby had been a moment of pure heroism, one that no one present would forget anytime soon. People in the crowd began to murmur among themselves, some exchanging looks of disbelief at the bravery they had just witnessed. A few began approaching Keanu, still in shock over how quickly and decisively he had acted. That was unbelievable, one man said, his voice filled with, You were right in there, right when it mattered. I thought for sure the car was going to explode. You didn't even hesitate. Keanu gave the man a humble smile, but didn't respond much. He wasn't there for the praise. He was there because something needed to be done, and he did it. A woman standing nearby approached, her phone out, obviously trying to capture the moment. You saved that baby's life. You really are a hero, she said. We saw everything. It's amazing how fast you were. Do you know how many people were just frozen, not knowing what to do? Keanu nodded gently, his face showing a slight smile, but his voice steady and unassuming. It wasn't about being fast. It was about doing something when someone needed help. Another onlooker, who had been watching from the sidewalk, stepped forward with a soft, amazed laugh. You really don't seek attention, do you? The way you just acted in the moment, it was like you didn't think about it. You just went in, and the next thing we know, the baby's safe. Keanu met their gaze, his eyes kind but without any hint of ego. Sometimes it's just about being in the right place when it counts. You can't always wait for others to act. If we can help, we should. The crowd stood around, some with tears in their eyes, still processing what had happened. A few began clapping, though Keanu, ever humble, simply nodded at them in acknowledgement and gave them a soft smile. He didn't want the applause, he wanted the baby and mother to be safe, and that was enough for him. As the crowd continued to gather their composure, Keanu turned back to the mother, who was still holding her child tightly in her arms, her eyes full of gratitude. She gave him a final smile, and as she stepped back toward the ambulance with her baby, she mouthed, "Thank you." Keanu nodded in her direction and slowly walked away, his steps calm as he disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a scene of stunned onlookers who would always remember the quiet man who had rushed into danger to save a child. As the firefighters and emergency responders took over, ensuring the area was safe and that the family would be well cared for, Keanu quietly stepped away from the scene. He wasn't one to linger in moments of praise, especially after an act of heroism that, for him, was simply the right thing to do. His heart still raced from the adrenaline of the rescue, but he felt the quiet calm settle over him. Keanu had done what he knew was necessary, and he was content with that. As he walked down the street, blending back into the bustling city, he didn't seek recognition or applause. His mind wasn't focused on the crowd or the cameras that might appear later. He had done what was needed in that moment, and that was enough. The city around him continued on, indifferent to the quiet act of bravery that had just taken place. People were still rushing to work, and the usual rhythm of daily life carried on. But Keanu knew that in his heart, he would always carry the memory of the baby, the mother, and the brief moment when he had stepped in to help. The sound of the city faded into the background as Keanu walked. The calm he sought found not in accolades or public praise, but in the simplicity of knowing that his actions had mattered, that he had made a difference, even in a small way, in someone's life. Keanu's thoughts drifted to the child and the mother, the relief he had seen in their eyes, and the deep gratitude that had filled the air. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound moments of connection happened in quiet, unseen ways, when one person reached out to help another in need. With a final glance over his shoulder, Keanu disappeared into the city's crowd, blending back into his usual anonymity. He didn't need to make headlines. He didn't need the world to know what he had done. His reward was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the baby was safe, the mother was whole again, and that for a brief moment he had been the one who made all the difference. The news of Keanu's heroic act spread quickly through the community. Social media posts, local news coverage, and word of mouth began to highlight the incredible rescue. But what was most striking was not the fame or recognition Keanu received, but the ripple effect his actions caused. Within hours, people from all walks of life were discussing the rescue and reflecting on what it meant. The incident had inspired countless others to reconsider their own responses to situations of need. People in the community began talking more openly about helping one another, about being present in times of crisis, and about the quiet acts of heroism that often go unnoticed. In the days that followed, small acts of kindness became more common. Neighbors checked on each other more often, people started helping strangers in simple ways, and many shared stories of how Keanu's example had motivated them to act with more compassion and urgency. A sense of unity spread through the community, and the incident was a reminder that even in the busiest, most chaotic of cities, there were always opportunities to do good. For the baby and her mother, life began to return to normal, but they would never forget what had happened. The mother made a point to share her story of gratitude with her child as she grew older, teaching her the importance of kindness and bravery, and reminding her that sometimes the smallest actions could have the biggest impact. Keanu, however, remained as humble and private as ever. Despite the widespread praise, he kept to himself, quietly moving through the world, content in knowing that his actions had made a difference, even if only for a brief moment in time. In the end, it wasn't the recognition that stayed with him, but the quiet feeling that, in that one moment, he had done exactly what was needed. He had made the world a little safer, a little kinder, and had shown the power of one person's decision to act when it mattered most.